Should the Saints roll with Jake Haener or Spencer Rattler at quarterback, and can they pull off their biggest win of the season and upset the Washington Commanders? We'll talk about that right here on the Straight Up Saints podcast.
You're listening to the Straight Up Saints podcast.
What is up, Who Dat Nation? Welcome back inside another edition of the Straight Up Saints podcast. I'm your host, Chris Rosvogel, and as always, the Straight Up Saints podcast is brought to you by Scott McNair, injury lawyers. Been injured any kind of accident, car, truck, 18-wheeler, hurt offshore. Scott McNair handles it all. You can give a call today at 504-500-1111 for a free consultation. They'll always fight for the win. The Saints, they're going to fight for the win this Sunday against the Commanders. They're going to have to do it without their starting quarterback, Derek Carr, suffering an injury against the Giants, multiple injuries against the Giants, putting them in a spot where you got to go with either Jake Haener and Spencer Rattler. And the Saints have made their decision in going with Jake Haener. And I think the interesting thing will be whether or not this goes for an extended period of time. I believe with 4 games left, I don't believe it'd be smart of the Saints to go with Derek Carr at any point in that 4-game stretch. You have the injury guarantee that you have to worry about. I also think for New Orleans at this point, you're kind of out of it, right? I know technically, mathematically speaking, the Saints aren't eliminated from the playoffs, but the Saints at 5-8, you don't feel like you're contending for anything. You still have the Falcons above you, and then the Buccaneers obviously in first place in the division and starting to play some better football, I'd say, over the last couple of weeks. I think there's no better time than right now to go after, this little window to get an evaluation on these quarterbacks. You got a little bit of an evaluation on Spencer Rattler earlier in the season. Granted, it's not as fair as you may want it to be without having the full offensive line at his disposal. But I think now's the moment where Jake Haener gets his shot. Now, it is being reported that Haener will start, but before that came out, we were thinking for this week's Tweet of the Week, we're going to talk about the options that the Saints had. And as always, our Tweet of the Week is presented by Standard Mortgage, your local lender for life. To get in touch with a home loan expert today, give them a call at 504-569-3902. I said earlier this week I'd start Jake Haener on Sunday, see how he plays, and go from there. Maybe give him the Green Bay game as well. And now it is being reported that Haener will be the starting quarterback, and that's the decision that Darren Rizzi's gone with. And I think this is the right decision for the Saints. I think at this point right now, you've seen what Rattler could do to a certain extent, and that doesn't mean that's what Rattler's going to be, right? An efficient quarterback who just couldn't really do much with this offense. He's still a rookie. You don't want to destroy his development. As for Jake Haener, he's in year 2. And there's no guarantee that the next coach is going to want Jake Haener on the roster per se. And I think this is a great opportunity for him to put something on tape and show whether it is Rizzi next year in the full-time role or someone else outside of the building as the next head coach, what he can do. So I think for him, didn't really get that opportunity outside of some spot minutes here and there when Derek Carr has been injured in games. Think of the Chiefs matchup. Think of last week versus the Giants for that one drive. And then against the Chargers when they bench Rattler at halftime. I think it's only fair to go with Jake Haener in this spot. And honestly, I think Jake Haener probably gives the Saints a better chance at this moment for one reason, just getting the ball out faster. I think for New Orleans right now, in terms of talent, I think Rattler's the more talented quarterback. I've felt that way for the majority of this time. But I think Haener will give the Saints a little bit of a quicker release point in terms of just getting the ball out quick, trying to keep them on schedule and keep it moving. And I think that's very important. Because right now, this Saints offensive line, unfortunately, where I've wanted to see them ascend, they're kind of descending. They had a really poor performance against the Giants. Against the Giants defensive line that didn't have Dexter Lawrence. They gave up a couple of sacks. Derek Carr was under pressure the whole game. And that's not what you want to see. So I think if you put Rattler back there, you're probably subjecting yourself to more of the same. More of having, your quarterback under constant duress and feeling like you're behind the chains. Whereas if you go with Haener, which is what I suggested earlier this week, and it seems like the Saints are going forward with Jake as the starter for this Sunday, I think Jake's just going to keep the chain moving a little bit quicker than Rattler would and at least keep you on schedule. And again, this doesn't mean he is the better quarterback down the road. Well, only time will answer that story because there's a chance neither one of these guys is a starting quarterback in this league. And honestly, history will probably tell you no than it would yes. But I think for Jake, he didn't get his opportunity yet. It's only right to go down this road, in my opinion, and just see what he has. If it's an utter disaster, you can always pivot. But I think it'd be good for the Saints to see what they have in Jake. And also, like I mentioned, Rizzi right now is in the business of trying to win games to help his resume out. Tomorrow is not promised for him. He's the interim coach. Give yourself the best chance to win. Best chance to win is probably going with a more game manager-esque quarterback right now. And I think Jake can do that for the Saints. So the Saints will be rolling with Jake Haener per reports. I think it's the better move. And again, if it goes south, you can always pivot. This is not one of those where you're kind of, tying yourself down to this quarterback for an extended period of time. It's one game, and we'll go from there. Now, once you move past this one game and past the next 3 after that, and you get into the offseason, there's going to be a big discussion about what will the Saints do at quarterback. And while I do think it's a discussion worth having, I believe it's one that at the end of the day, we're all going to come back to an answer that probably not a lot of fans want. And that answer for me is, I believe when the dust settles and everything's done, the Saints will roll with Derek Carr for one more season. I'm not saying it's the right thing to do. I'm not saying it's the wrong thing to do. I just think it's what they're going to do. And I think financials will absolutely play a part in this. When you look at the team like the Saints right now, where they're so kind of, at a cap burden, I think you got to do what's financially responsible for your team. And I don't know if just releasing Derek Carr and eating $50 million in dead cap is exactly the financially responsible thing. Now, I also don't think the financially responsible thing is to restructure his contract and tie yourself down to a couple more years of Derek Carr when next year should be the absolute final year at the most for him in New Orleans. But that's just where I feel like it's at. I think with this contract situation, even if you take the injury guarantee out, right, which is why I would sit him. There's no reason to guarantee more money than you're already guaranteeing for Derek Carr. I believe Carr, with that cap situation that the Saints have, and the fact that he is, at the moment, still their best option at quarterback in terms of who gives them the best chance to win, I do believe he will be their starter next year. But it better be the final year of Derek Carr starting, because I think for New Orleans, you're getting your answer very quickly where, not that we needed it, but you're seeing it. Derek Carr is a fine quarterback, but fine is not good enough. And the Saints, to pay $40 million for fine is frustrating because you could probably pay a lot less for fine. The Seahawks are paying less for Geno Smith, who I believe has played better football. The Buccaneers are paying less for Baker Mayfield, who I believe is playing better football. So I think for New Orleans, if you go into next year with Derek Carr being your starting quarterback, so be it. I'm not going to be up in arms about it. I've kind of expected it at this point. But I do believe the Saints have to make sure that they do everything in their power to ensure that they can get out of that Derek Carr business after next season. Because the worst possible thing for them is to continue this kicking the can down the road stuff, which I know they're going to have to do to some degree to get under the cap, but I don't think it should be with Derek Carr. I don't think it should be with Derek Carr. I think with Derek, next year, you know what? You start him. It is what it is. It's got to be the final year. Because if your quarterback is $40 million but limited, it's a tough business to kind of sell. Because I'm not saying Derek Carr is a bad quarterback, but Derek Carr needs the line to hold up. He needs the receivers to be there. And he's not making plays off script. And that, again, this doesn't mean Derek Carr is a bad quarterback. I think he's an average quarterback. I think in a league of 32 starters, he's definitely better than at least 10 to 12 of them. But that is not enough in this league for that price tag. And I think for New Orleans, you can, if you ever go down the bridge option again, it should be much cheaper than at $40 million. Because essentially that's what Derek's kind of become. The Saints went for the risk. I thought it was an okay move when they made it. I had no problem with the Saints going after them. But after 2 years of this sample size now, you can tell where this is heading. So I believe Carr will be the starting quarterback for next season. I wouldn't play him another game this year. There's no point. He's coming off 2 injuries now. I would sit him. And besides the fact the injury guarantee that I mentioned, that's just an added bonus of a reason to not do it. But I do believe he'll be back for 2025. I'm sure Saints fans will have a bunch of debates about his status and all that. But I think it's a move that at the end of the day, the Saints probably felt like, you know what, this is our best option. So be it. So I believe Derek will be back, but you got to make sure that you kind of leave yourself an out for after the 2025 season and don't kind of hit your, to that wheel anymore. I just don't think it would be smart for the Saints. So they do have a game this Sunday, of course. Obviously, 4 of them left. Washington Commanders are next up on the schedule. We'll talk about that game in just a little bit, and a couple of takeaways and keys that you really want to pay attention to for these final 4 games before this 2024 season wraps up. I'll get into that. Before I do that, though, I want to get a quick word from Scott Fickner.
And Jonathan Williams brings it all the way back from the 20-yard line.
What a terrific way to end the first half.
And tonight's game is brought to you by Scott Fickner Injury Attorneys. They always fight for the win.
You mean attorney? It's one lawyer. Scott Fickner?
No, there's 2.
Brad Scott and David Fickner.
Well, it's confusing.
That it is. They could have picked a better name.
Scott Fickner, Injury Attorneys, we fight for the win.
Once again, thank you to Scott McNair for being part of the program. We greatly appreciate it. So let's get into some things to watch for these final 4 games. And obviously that includes this Sunday's contest against the Commanders. I think the first one now is kind of a no-brainer, especially with the Saints reportedly making the decision to go with Jake Haener. You're going to look at this young quarterback room, right? 4-game sample size that you're going to have coming up, assuming Carr doesn't play again this season. And I think that would be the smart decision for the Saints. Let's see what Jake Haener has. Odds are it probably doesn't go well, but what if it does? What if Jake Haener looks like a decent enough option that the Saints think, hey, next season, if we really want to go cheap at quarterback, you can go cheap with Jake Haener. It's unlikely, sure, but it's a possibility. So let's see how the next 4 games go. I think how he plays is something to watch. And look, this is a Commanders team that has kind of been up and down all year long, and especially over the last couple of weeks. There's moments where I've seen them look great. And, you go to that, let's say the Titans game where they jump out to 28-0 lead. And there's moments where they struggle, whether it is looking at the Cowboys game, looking at the Philly game. Granted, those are much better opponents, but they've kind of been up and down throughout the year. And even in the moments where they've had those win streaks, it's been close games, beating the Giants by 5, beating the Bears on the Hail Mary. So I'm not going to get into the whether it's winnable or not. Every game is essentially winnable. But I think for Jake Haener, how you fare against a Commanders defense that has had its moments is going to be interesting. But you've also seen quarterbacks, even the Will Levises of the world, have put up decent numbers against Washington's defense. So it's going to be an opportunity for him. Oddly enough, you're going to have to go up against a defense that is going to feature someone that us Saints fans know very well in Marshawn Lattimore, who is expected to play this week, which is kind of funny. He hasn't played yet for Washington. And of course, go figure, the game that he makes his debut is against the Saints. But you're going to watch Jake Haener. You're going to see how he looks in that 4-game stretch. If he gets all 4 games, there's no doubt about that. Another thing you're going to watch is Bryan Bresee, who last week won the game for the Saints. I don't even think that's, hyperbolic to say. I mean, the man literally blocked a game-tying field goal attempt at the buzzer, if you want to call it that. And he's a player who there are, flaws in the run defense of his game. And we've all talked about him not being a good run defender. And I think it's something that probably doesn't change. But I think for Bryan Bresee, at 7.5 sacks this year, a chance to get to 10. This is a player that's ascending in that regard, at least after getting after the quarterback. And I think for him, if he's able to finish this year on a really strong note, get himself to 10 sacks, I think for New Orleans, at least going into next year, you feel like, hey, we got one defensive lineman at minimum that we can really trust. And I think for them, it's a little bit better of a spot than you felt like you'd be in maybe a couple months ago. So Bresee's been on the rise. Can he continue to finish strong? I think he will. I think he's really coming into his own now. This is a talented player. This is a guy that was a former number 1 recruit in his class. So when he starts shining like this, I don't view it as a fluke. I view it as a sign of things to come. But I'd like to see him continue. Foot on the gas, keep it going. He was excellent in the last 2 games. I hope he keeps that up for the final 4. Now, keep it on the defense. Alontae Taylor and Kool-Aid McKinstry. Those are going to be your starting cornerbacks next year. Maybe you get Paulson Adebo back on a cheap 1-year deal if the market's not there. And I feel for him. I don't know what the market will look like after the injury he had. But Alontae, we know the talent's there. It's a matter of consistency. And Kool-Aid, we know the talent's there. It's a matter of availability, which, early in the season, due to the depth, didn't get. Now he's getting the chances. And I think for him, the opportunities are coming up. Week to week, he's winning some reps, losing some reps. We go back to last week's game against the Giants. We saw some great coverage on Malik Neighbors. We've also seen him lose a rep going deep against Malik Neighbors. And that's part of the battle, right? He doesn't need to be perfect. He's a rookie cornerback. But 2nd-round pick, Saints clearly valued him to move up. And I think for Kool-Aid and Alontae, this is a great showcase, especially for Kool-Aid McKinstry. I think this is the opportunity for him to kind of cement his status as a starter for next year. And honestly, this isn't to be a hot take. I genuinely believe this, and I think a lot of people probably would agree. I think Kool-Aid McKinstry is going to put himself in position where he'll be the number 1 corner for the Saints next year if he continues on this track. I think his instincts and his discipline are really impressive for a rookie playing a position that the rules are going against you, and he just has that it factor. So Kool-Aid McKinstry, looking out for him, and of course Alontae Taylor, because Alontae Taylor's kind of been this roller coaster, right? Rookie year, really great. 2nd year, fall off. 3rd year starts outstanding in the slot. Outstanding. You kick him to the outside with no Lattimore, no Adebo. Starts off struggling. He's starting to play a little bit better. Now, is it because they played the Giants? It could be. The Giants are an absolute train wreck. They're the worst team in the league, in my opinion. But let's see now. 4 more games left against some pretty decent quarterbacks in Jaden Daniels, Jordan Love. He finished the year with Baker Mayfield. If Alontae can finish on a high note, I think that bodes well for him. And remember, next year, he'll be playing for a contract. So we'll see what happens with Alante, but him and Kool-Aid, how do they play at the cornerback spot? Going to be evaluating them. Kendra Miller finally did something last week. I thought he gave the running game a little bit of an added boost. The numbers weren't exactly popping off the page, but anyone who watched that game saw he gave them that second effort. He gave them good contact balance. He gave them ability to really run the ball well in the red zone. And I think for Kendra, the talent is there, and there's no question that he can play. His is simply, can he stay healthy? And now he's got a chance here over the next 4 games to A, prove that he can do something in a bigger role, but B, and the more important thing, prove that he can stay healthy for a little bit of a stretch. So Kendra Miller, 4 games left. You're going against the Commanders, the Packers, Raiders, Bucks. What do you do? Can you prove that you can be a supporting player next to Alvin Kamara? If he does that, that helps him, going into next offseason, because the Saints right now need running back help. And even if Kendra plays well, they'll probably still need running back help. But it's not a dire need if Kendra plays really well the next 4 games. If he plays really well, you at least can hold off on that, whether it's adding a vet in free agency late, whether it's adding a running back late in day 3 of the draft, whatever it may be, you at least have the flexibility there if Kendra looks good. So I'm looking at Kendra Miller. Last but certainly not least, offensive line as a whole, but especially your offensive tackles. Truthfully, I did not like what I saw last week from the Saints offensive line. I thought that was a really ugly performance against the Giants, a really disappointing performance. I thought this was going to be an opponent where you kind of be able to steamroll them. So now you have an opportunity over the next 4 games to see if your O-line can finish on a high note. And I don't see anything right now that would tell me the Saints would have different starting offensive tackles next year, nor do I want them to. Fuaga's got that talent that we know when he's on his game, he can be a star at that offensive tackle position if he continues to develop. And then Trevor Penning, really good in the run game, has struggled in pass protection, especially at certain times, and he's just been up and down. Can he finish on a high note and go into the offseason feeling like he did enough that he can build on and become a reliable offensive tackle in pass protection? And again, that's a big if, but I think in the next 4 games, that's a guy that you have to highlight. Because if the Saints can go into the offseason feeling like, man, we have bookend offensive tackles, you're feeling a lot better about that unit. You still got to get better at guard. You still have to get better at guard. I don't love long-term playing at left guard, obviously, with Lucas Patrick, and obviously Nick Saldiveri got hurt, the poor guy. And then Cesar Ruiz, who I believe has had 1 good year in a Saints uniform, if I'm being, truthful. So I believe for New Orleans, how does Brian Brzee look? How do your outside cornerbacks look in Alante and Kool-Aid? Can Kendra give you some juice? Can the O-line improve? And can one of these young quarterbacks, which it looks to be Jake Haener starting this Sunday, and if he does decent, should probably get another start or 2, maybe even 3, can he show the Saints a little something? Because right now, the quarterback room, long-term prospects, isn't exactly looking so great. So we'll see what happens there for the Saints. Before we wrap things up, we're going to get any comments that you guys have left in the chat. I think we got a couple to get to, and then that'll be it. But before we do that, I want to get a quick word from Theo's Pizza.
Scan the code now and tackle your hunger with Theo's Pizza, your neighborhood pizza with 5 convenient locations. Who dat? Your taste buds are about to find out.
Once again, thank you to Theo's Pizza. So we're going to jump into our fan Q&A presented by Sunshine, your hometown John Deere. Nothing runs like a deer. Got a couple of comments to get to, and then we'll go from there. We'll get into Super Saints fan. Says, I think Haener should start because we get the offense in the right plays and audible into a better one when available. And also, if the O-line blocks well enough, we can get the run game going. I mean, run game is going to be paramount for either one that was going to start, right? I think to be able to take pressure off a young quarterback, and really, if we're just going off starts, they're both rookies. I know Haener's in his 2nd year, but he hasn't had the chance to start. And then Rattler obviously is a rookie. So in terms of experience, they're both kind of babies in that regard. To get the run game going would be huge for this offense to take some pressure off of Jake Haener and make him feel like you're not playing at a disadvantage. If they can get into 2nd and 5 or 3rd and 3s and make sure they're in those manageable downs and distance, that'd be obviously crucial for them. And that starts with making sure that you run the football well. And they did not run the football well last week against the Giants, which was kind of shocking considering that was a unit that got, just thrashed by the Cowboys the week prior. And now they have to show that they can bounce back. And we'll be interesting to see both from a player perspective and also coaching perspective. I did not think Clint Kubiak had a great game plan against the Giants. We'll see if he can do a better one this week. Michael says, with the super chat, thank you for the support. Michael says, I think Lattimore will be motivated. Yeah, I don't think there's a question about it, right? Former team, even if this is what Lattimore wanted, and I believe it is, I believe he wanted to get traded, there's obviously got to be motivation, right? You're going up against your former team, former employer. I think it'd be a little bit different if Dennis Allen was still employed. I think Dennis Allen was kind of the heart of the Marshawn Lattimore problem. I don't think they saw eye to eye there. Now that he's out of the picture, I think it's a little bit different. But I do believe that there will be motivation. There's no question about that. And that's normal. That's totally okay. I have no ill will towards Marshawn Lattimore. I want Marshawn Lattimore to have success. Just not this Sunday, obviously, for the Saints' perspective. But I hope Lattimore thrives there. Lattimore's been a fan favorite for a while, rightfully deserved. And I think that for him, first game in Washington now, got to be motivated. And remember, when Washington trades for him, it's not you're just doing it to make a splash. It's a guy that they want to make an impact in the postseason this year. This is a guy that they believe when they get into the heart of their run with Dan Quinn over the next couple of years, that he's going to be a central piece on the defense. So, yeah, there's no doubt about it. He'll be motivated. Just Call Me Trey says, Drew Lock had over 50 yards rushing against us. This man, Jaden, might go over 100. One thing I know is that I believe our primary goal in the draft should start at the D-line. Yeah, I agree with that for sure. One of my problems that I had last week during the Saints-Giants game, did not feel like they had any closers, on the D-line. I know Brzee can play, and I just raved about him before. But I think every great team needs a defensive end late in games that can slam the doors shut. And a lot of them have had them. And the Saints, unfortunately, they did have a great defensive end. Cam Jordan was a great player for a long time. No longer is that. Carl Granderson is a good player. I don't think he's a great player. And Chase Young is going to be a story of what ifs, right? A guy that started off his career as a rookie of the year, playing really well, and just hasn't been able to match that level. So I do agree with you. I do think the Saints need to get better at the D-line. I think they need to get better at edge rusher. And I don't love that Drew Lock, who's not a mobile quarterback, ran for over 50 rushing yards, and Jaden Daniels, who knows how to run, is coming up next. Like it just seems like a recipe for disaster. But we'll see what happens. Rosenfield 10 says the Saints need everything, so I'm all about best player available in the early rounds. But if I did arrange the positions of need, I'd highlight defensive end, offensive guard, safety, cornerback, offensive tackle, wide receiver, and defensive tackle. Yeah, I think those are fair. I'd probably bump up defensive tackle a little bit more. I think one thing about the Saints that's really been evident the last 2 years, not being able to stop the run. And when you can't stop the run, you let teams dictate the pace of the game. You let them control time of possession. And we've seen that a couple times the last 2 years. So I think they do need to get a run stuffer. Obviously, don't get me wrong. I think defensive end should be the biggest need. You got to watch these Saints games and see these quarterbacks who have all day to throw. It makes me sick. I fucking hate it. They need defensive end help. I do think they needed a run stuffer, though. That'll take a lot of pressure off of Brzee, kind of clog up the lane. Offensive guard I mentioned before, there's no question they need to get better at that. They need a long-term plan at offensive guard. You got one in center, and you got one at offensive tackle. You need one at offensive guard. A cornerback's going to be interesting. I think it's one where they need to address, obviously, now. But Alante's still young. Kool-Aid's a rookie. Who knows, man? I thought Rico Payton looked great in the preseason. Obviously, he's been in a special teams role right now. But who knows? Maybe Rico Payton can develop. So I'm not as concerned at that position. Safety, definitely, they need a long-term plan at safety. They don't have one at all right now. And wide receiver, I love Olave. I love Shaheed. They don't add a playmaking pass catcher. We got problems. Because that is a position I feel like the Saints have neglected for a while. They better not neglect it anymore. They need to get better at wide receiver and tight end. Got to add some weapons in the offensive game, and I believe they will. So there's a lot of position needs. And the crazy thing is, you mentioned all those, and you're absolutely right to mention all those positions. We didn't even get to quarterback, which long-term plan-wise, Saints are going to have to figure out at some point. So it'll be interesting. 4 games left. I believe the Saints are probably going to go 1-3 in this stretch, if I'm being truthful. I don't expect them to beat the Commanders on Sunday, although I can see them keeping it close. Do not expect them to beat the Packers. I believe that one might get ugly. And I think for them, Raiders probably win. Who knows? And Buccaneers, it's a toss-up because it's a division game. So we'll see what happens. But I think the Saints probably finish this year at either 5-12 or 6-11. My guess would be 6-11 is where they finish it at. Rosenfield 10 says the Saints have 6 defensive tackles under contract next year, but none of them can stop the run. LOL. And it's something that the Saints were great at back then, right? Like, I think of the Saints, when they got in that run from 2017 to 2020, they were just neutralizing opposing teams' ground attacks, making you one-dimensional. And when they make you one-dimensional like that, guess what? Not only do their pass rushers get to pin their ears back, their corners know what's coming. You know what? You don't have to worry about it. You got them in 3rd and long. You're in a great position. Saints obviously have had a lot of DB talent over the last couple of years, and that's what made them so great. Now, you can run on the Saints, If you start running on the team, you got to start inching up, putting guys in the box, makes you susceptible deep. Just not a great recipe for success. So the Saints are going to have to get better in that. There's no doubt about it. I think we'll have more clarity, though, once we figure out who the head coach is. If you go offensive head coach, who knows? We might get a couple more years of a bad run defense. You get a defensive-minded coach, I'd imagine their first thing they're going to want to do is fix this run defense and acknowledge that it's been one of the silent killers for this team over the last 2 years. But we'll see what happens. You know, the run defense obviously is going to be a major thing to highlight this Sunday against the Commanders, whether you're looking at Jaden Daniels, who we know, it can obviously put up great numbers in the passing game, but can also beat you with your legs. And then, Brian Robinson, who I believe has all the makings of a guy that can probably do some damage this week. He's had some big games this year. Would not be surprised if he has one this Sunday. But it's a great chance. It's a great test for Jake Haener, who's going to start. It's a good test for Darren Rizzi, who's 3-1 as an interim coach. First tough game was against the Rams. They lost that one. Now you got a tough one without your starting quarterback. How do you look? If he could put something on tape, if they win this game, that'll look good for his resume. If they keep it close, that'll still look good for his resume. You want a prepared team. The next 2 games, the Saints are going to play playoff caliber teams. I believe that that'll give you a little bit of a better idea of who Darren Rizzi is as a coach, if the Saints can do well in that span. Rosenfield 10 says we need it all quarterback, linebacker, running back, tight end too. The quarterback question gets answered with the next head coach. Rizzi is 3-1. Good luck. Yeah, I do believe that for sure. The next coach that comes in, they better have their say at quarterback. If not, you're just doing it ass backwards. So I agree with you wholeheartedly. And you mentioned Rizzi being 3-1. 3-1 so far. Next 2 games, who knows? I mean, look, if the Saints are able to pull off 2 upsets back-to-back, you probably look at them differently. If they go get blown out of the next 2, you probably got your answer. So we'll see what happens for New Orleans. They play Washington this Sunday. We'll have our halftime show for that one as always, which will be powered by 4D, and then our post-game live stream as always. If anything breaks over the next couple days, you guys know we'll have it covered here on the Straight Up Saints podcast. So make sure you subscribe to Boot Crew Media and make sure you keep hitting the notification bell to get alerted for new content, because we'll have it rolling here this Sunday on the Straight Up Saints podcast, the destination for the Who Dat Nation.